Good morning and welcome to Light Reflections from First Friends. We are glad you have chosen to join us for this virtual worship service and hope you find it beneficial to your spiritual journey. We consider this an abbreviated version of our in-person meeting for worship for those wishing to join us from a distance. If this is your first time joining us, First Friends is a thriving, progressive Quaker meeting in the city of Indianapolis, Indiana. We consider ourselves a loving, inclusive, joyous gathering of people seeking to know truth under the leadership of God's Spirit. All are welcome, no matter race, age, cultural background, sexual orientation and identity, marital status, physical and mental ability, family structure, or economic circumstance. Our hope is that through this worship experience, you will discover our faith community is unlike any other, where silent meditation is as important as the spoken word, where we emphasize the importance of one's personal encounter with the divine, and where we seek to support one another as we discover truth together. Now we invite you to center down and enter this virtual worship space with us.
Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land where I'm bound, where I'm bound. Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land where I'm bound. There'll be freedom in that land. There'll be freedom in that land. There will be a freedom in that land where I'm bound. There will be freedom in that land. There will be freedom in that land. There will be freedom in that land where I'm bound. There will be justice. There will be justice in that land. There will be justice in that land. There will be justice in that land where I'm bound, where I'm bound. Oh, there will be justice in that land. There will be justice in that land. There will be justice in that land where I'm bound. No more hunger in that land. No more hunger in that land. No more hunger in that land where I'm bound. Oh, no more hunger in that land. No more hunger in that land. No more hunger in that land where I'm bound. Building bridges between our divisions. I reach out to you, will you reach out to me? With all of our voices and all of our visions, friends, we could make such sweet harmony. Building bridges between our divisions. I reach out to you, will you reach out to me? With all of our voices and all of our visions, friends, we could make such sweet harmony.
Good morning, friends. This morning, we welcome Jill Frame to give our message. Jill's a good friend of mine and is finishing up her master's in divinity from Earlham School of Religion as well as her master's in marriage and family therapy, yet this year from Christian Theological Seminary. Jill and her husband Ben and her two kids, Vera and Nolan, are active participants in all the activities and life at First Friends. Jill, we really appreciate you bringing the message this morning.
Good morning, friends. My name is Jill, and for those of you who don't know me, I attend this meeting, and presently I am working towards obtaining a Master's of Divinity at Earlham College. And Bob was gracious enough to ask me to give the sermon today, and so here I am, right before MLK Day, and I thought I would like to really focus on King's letter from the Birmingham jail. So, without further ado, I'm going to start by using his words from that letter. We who engage in nonviolent direct action are not the creators of tension. We merely bring to the surface the hidden tension that is already alive. We bring it out in the open where it can be seen and dealt with, like a boil that can never be cured so long as it is covered up, but must be opened with all its ugliness to the natural medicine of air and light. Injustice must be exposed with the tension its exposure creates to the light of human conscience and the air of national opinion before it can be cured. You know, there is something about history that conveys a feeling of inevitability. So I really think it's easy to look back at Martin Luther King Jr. sitting in a jail cell in Birmingham, Alabama in April 1963 with his pencil stub in hand and imagine him confidently, assuredly writing what he just knew would be a work for the ages. Words that would really propel one of the most successful social justice campaigns in history and be proclaimed by presidents, recited by elementary school students, and emblazoned on billboards and greeting cards. But I read some of the words to you from King's letter to remind us the truth is far different. I did research as I decided to use this passage from King, and it is fascinating to get the context from which King wrote these letters. At the time, he was a 34-year-old preacher, and he landed in a bleak cell on Good Friday and was unsure whether the act of civil disobedience that brought him there, which were trumped-up charges of violating a parade ordinance, had made any difference at all. The civil rights movement was still young and had turned to its most ambitious target yet. Birmingham, as it was often known, was a contradiction. Birmingham was a fast-growing city and a town where racial segregation and the indignities of Jim Crow laws were locked in tight. Even though still working wages paid to blacks were half the amount paid to whites, they offered the best jobs around, and very few people in Birmingham were interested in rocking that boat. Still, in January 1963, as Governor George Wallace was declaring segregation now, segregation forever in Alabama, King's Southern Christian Leadership Conference, or more commonly known as the SCLC, decided to target Birmingham with an economic boycott during the Easter shopping season. Let me note, few joined in on this boycott. In fact, most middle-class blacks and about 3/4 of black clergy joined most of the whites in opposing the protest, arguing that the city should be given a chance. After all, they argued a new mayor had just been elected and they wanted to give him some time to make changes. However, as I was researching more, according to Jonathan Ryder, who's a professor of sociology at Barnard College and the author of Gospel of Freedom, Martin Luther King Jr.'s Letter from Birmingham Jail and the Struggle That Changed a Nation, it was while sitting in solitary confinement without food and with very little community support, King was at one of his lowest points. King was actually panicked, truly panicked, and it's for good reason. 3 years prior, King had been jailed without any of his SCLC allies in Atlanta. At one point during his imprisonment, King was put into a straitjacket and driven through the dark of night to the Reedsville prison. During the 3.5-hour drive, King was convinced he was being taken to an unknown location to be killed by the Ku Klux Klan. Now, here he is in Birmingham, once again, jailed without any allies. He was scared that the same fate awaited him in Birmingham that had in Atlanta. King was not only anxious, he was also incredibly depressed. One day while in jail, a trustee snuck in the Birmingham newspaper for him. King read the front page column, which was written by 8 prominent and, mind you, very moderate Alabama clergymen, comprised of a priest, a rabbi, and 6 Protestant ministers. Mind you, these clergymen might be called in today's vernacular white allies. Rather than supporting King, they accused him of violence and appealed for calmness and forbearance. After Martin Luther King read the column, he fell into a spiral of despair and a crisis of spirit. So let's pause and consider that appeal, framed as it was in such reasonable language by well-respected clergymen. Quote, "Let's just calm down now. I'm sure we can work something out." And there's obviously nothing wrong with that statement. Nobody likes conflicts. We all want to get along and resolve things. And that is good. But what happens when what appears to be reasonableness is just a way of masking obstruction, a way of sweeping under the rug valid complaints of injury and oppression, a way of discounting the felt experience of people who see no hope of remedy? It's a problem stated perhaps most famously in the ancient Hebrew scripture, the book of Jeremiah, where the prophet complains, quote, "I have given heed and listened, but they do not speak honestly. No one repents of wickedness, saying, 'What have I done?' All of them turn to their own course like a horse plunging headlong into battle. They have treated the wound of my people carelessly, saying, 'Peace, peace,' when there is no peace." True that, I say to Jeremiah. There comes a point when we must pivot from the response that is reasonable to the one that the writer Cornel West calls radical, a solution that goes to the root of the problem, that questions the most fundamental assumptions and argues for new ways of looking at the world. West argues that now, a half a century after King's death, we have lost sight of the absolute radical edge of his work, of all the ways that his work questioned fundamental structures in American society and called us to larger lives. We find the ground laid for the radical King in the letter. And who knows, but for that front page appeal from his critics, King may very well not have had the impetus at that point in his life to gather his thoughts the way that he had. We know that he was depressed from the lack of the response to the protest, editorials from national newspapers criticizing his actions, and President Kennedy's resistance to requests to help him. He was also sad at being away from his wife Coretta 2 days after the birth of their daughter Bernice. Ultimately, though, that column ignited a fire in King, and he began writing so feverishly that some of his supporters worried for his state of mind. Wyatt Walker, a close friend and ally, went to visit King 4 days after his arrest. Walker later reported being perplexed after his visit. He couldn't understand why King was so angered by the column. He wondered, why is he so upset at these white preachers? This is exactly what we expected. We've got to get protests going. Let's start focusing on liberating blacks. Why is he worried about these white preachers? And yet, he was. All alone, King began scribbling on the edge of the newspaper. Then, when all the empty edges of the newspaper were depleted, he moved on to using sheet after sheet of prison toilet paper. His writings were smuggled out of the jail by a friend named Clarence Jones, who stuffed the writings down the front of his pants. King's toilet paper and newspaper writings were then passed on to his 17-year-old secretary, who did her best to decipher his handwriting. For all of King's dreams, this letter starts out on toilet paper and newspaper in a cry of pain and anger. It is here, amid personal reflections on his family's experience with racism and musings over passages of scriptures that he laid down, how he understood his calling to radical activism, nonviolent but centered in a love that refuses to see the separations that Birmingham's laws enforced. You know the words. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, he writes. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. He acknowledges that the purpose of his action is not to make peace, but to stir things up, to, quote, create at such a crisis and establish such creative tension that a community that has consistently refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue. These words may sound shocking, he says, but he makes no apologies. Quote, there is a type of constructive nonviolent tension that is necessary for growth. Now is the time to make real the promise of democracy, to lift our national policy from the quicksand of racial injustice to the solid rock of human dignity. King was released from jail on April 20th, and nothing much happened to the letter right away. It was released to the press, and few newspapers were interested, and it was pretty much ignored. Further, its address recipients never saw it until it was published months later. King's friend, Wyatt Walker, was concerned at the lack of press attention that the letter got, so he went to the American Friends Service Committee, and they were the first organization to publish the letter at the end of May as a pamphlet. Christian Century was next to publish it on June 12th, and finally, the New York Post published it too. Today, I'm not recalling Dr. King's whole life from cradle to grave, or to discuss him preaching about the meaning of his great dream. Today, I thought it was important to spend a little bit of time really focusing on the story behind Dr. King's now famous letter. Let us not forget that the letter was written while King was in utter despair and was terrified for his life. He was able to hold on to the painful tension of feeling his fury and anguish, all the while refusing to stop creating a movement he believed in. He found a constructive way to channel those feelings into this now famous letter. Let us not forget that parts of the letter had their humble origins on the edges of smuggled newspaper and pieces of prison toilet paper. Let us not forget that only a small audience at first appreciated its importance. While it becomes a great document in retrospect, the circumstances of how it came into being are anything but. On the day that King received the Nobel Prize, the head of the Nobel Committee referred to this specific letter. He channeled King when he stated, "These are words delivered to mankind. These are words for global injustice. These are words that arise from a context, but they are universal." Outside of the time and place in which he lived, his words have stood the test of time. I hope you will take a few minutes tomorrow to read this terrific letter, to ask yourself how the letter might inspire you to take action. His words stand the test of time. When Dr. King was arrested in Birmingham, Alabama, for participating in a civil rights demonstration, he laid out what was necessary for people to do to live in this new day and be the new day, to reject the myth of time. And with that, I'll give Dr. King the last words for today. Quote, "It is the strangely irrational notion that there is something in the very flow of time that will inevitably cure all ills. We must come to see that human progress never rolls in on the wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts and persistent work of men and women willing to be co-workers with God, and without this hard work, time itself becomes an ally of the force of social stagnation." As we prepare for waiting worship, let's ponder these queries together. How have you allowed the myth of time, the strange irrational notion that there is something in the very flow of time that will inevitably cure all ills, to impede you from action? Have we spent much time contemplating something radical, that is, a solution that goes to the root of the problem, that questions the most fundamental of our assumptions? How are you personally inspired by Dr. King's dogged commitment to the writing of this letter in the direst of circumstances? How can you take action?
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. us march on till victory is won. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, thou who hast by thy might led us into the light, keep us forever in the path we pray. Lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met thee, lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. Shadowed beneath thy hand, may we forever stand, true to our God, true to our native land.
We close this time of worship with a Quaker prayer. God, open our eyes and unstop our ears, that we may see your light and may hear your heartbeat, reflecting and resounding within our chests, in those of all our neighbors, near and far, in all creatures and plants, and in the ground we walk upon. When we finally are able to yield to the leading of your rhythm and flow, may we come to walk cheerfully over the world, answering that of you in all. Amen. Have a great week, friends.